Today I'm answering some of your most asked questions. We are going to talk about yarn, how to choose it, how to afford it, and what to do with it. And we are also diving into natural dyeing, which is one of my absolute favorite topics to talk about. So make yourself a cup of coffee or tea, get your knitting project, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Before we get started, I do have to put a little disclaimer out. If you've seen my videos before, you know that I pretty much always like to wear something hand knitted in the videos, but it is pretty hot today here in Germany and we do not have AC, so that is why I'm not wearing something knitted today. But this top is handmade nonetheless. I sewed it myself and it is a beautiful linen fabric. In case you're interested in either the pattern or the fabric, I'm going to link it down below along with everything else that I'm mentioning in this video. Let's get into it now. I would love a discussion about affordability. I'm an older knitter on a limited income. The vast majority of yarns are way out of my budget. I knit for the love of the craft. This question is really close to my heart because quality yarn can get quite expensive and I do not want to minimize that. But I think there are several possibilities for you to get yarn that is of good quality and still somewhat affordable. For example, you could check in a de-stash group, either locally or on Ravelry, where people are listing some of their stash yarn that they don't want anymore for sale, and that way you can get high quality yarn at a bit more of affordable prices. And secondly, there are also yarn swap groups where you can maybe get rid of some yarn that you don't want anymore and in return get something that you would like to knit. Another possibility is getting a store-bought or a sweater, a commercially made sweater in a second-hand store and unravel that. I have done that I think twice before and I do have to say it is a bit of a time investment to, first sort out the construction of the sweater and where you have to start unraveling and then, just do the job. It takes a couple of hours, but I think if you do have some time on your hands and you would like to get like maybe a cashmere yarn or something like this, unraveling a store-bought sweater is a great option. Let me think, what else? I think for me, having a handmade wardrobe is not about, owning a lot of clothes. It's more about being very intentional with a smaller amount of clothes. So I think this is something to take into account as well. I would much rather spend a bit more amount of money on some good quality yarn and then really enjoy knitting with it and then also wearing the finished piece over and over again for years to come, rather than purchasing a bigger number of cheaper yarn that I first don't really like to knit with and then also don't really like to wear and it starts to pill immediately and things like that. So I think that's something to keep in mind as well. And I do have to say I see where you're coming from, because when I started knitting we were only on one income and I really was very intentional about where I spent my money. So that's actually one of the reasons that I got into natural yarn dyeing in the first place, because if you buy an undyed yarn, especially if it's from a local sheep breed, it's usually not as expensive. I could have not afforded, those hand-dyed yarns at that time, certainly not. So I started experimenting dyeing the yarn myself and then having a pretty hand-dyed skein of yarn for a fraction of the price. So this would maybe be something for you to consider as well. I would like to know your favorite yarn base to knit with and your favorite yarn base for dyeing. Are there differences? If so, why? And what is your favorite yarn? Maybe an answer for socks and one for garments. And I would like to know your favorite yarns, needles and notions and the reason why they are your favorites. So let's start with the commercial yarns first. At the moment I really like blown yarns. So those are yarns that have a mesh tube. It's often a cotton mesh tube that has the fiber blown into it, and it creates in a very light and airy yarn that is just very soft and knits up beautifully. And I do have an example here to show you. So this is Snevnook by Kamarose, which is a Danish yarn brand. And in case you're wondering why this looks so messy, I just unraveled a cardigan that I've made, I think last year, and that I wasn't wearing because the fit was not what I was expecting. So I just took the time to unravel the whole thing, and then I also wound it up in skeins and washed it again. I usually do not do that. I have to admit, when I unravel something, I usually just unravel and then start knitting with it right away. But I think the blown yarn really benefited from that because it was very compressed in the finished fabric. So I think it's looking much better now. And let's see, I also really like unspun yarn, so primarily Nutiden from the Swedish company Norweger. And here's an example. So this is, like I said, an unspun yarn that comes in those plates. It is quite delicate and a bit fragile, but I really like the depth of color that they create, and it just feels so special knitting with this yarn. I can't really explain it, but yeah, it's one of my favorites for sure. Let's see, besides that, in general, thinking about fibers, I like yarns that have an alpaca content because I always like the drapiness and the softness. I also like blends with silk in it. I have another example here. I'm currently knitting on a sock. So this is a blend of, I think, merino, alpaca and silk. This is Pasquale Pinta that was very kindly gifted to me by the company, and it has this beautiful subtle sheen that is created by the silk, and it's just a very lovely yarn to knit with overall. I just made a summer top with it, so a short sleeved tee, and yeah, it's just very nice and also comfortable to wear in the warmer months of the year. When it comes to natural dyeing, I definitely prefer protein fibers over plant-based fibers. So I like to dye on wool yarn compared to, let's say, linen or cotton yarn, because those take the dye very differently. And yeah, I just much more prefer the protein fibers. I also really like blends. For example, I have a wool linen blend that is one of my sock yarn bases called Merino Lino, and I just love the fact that the protein fiber and the plant-based fiber take the dye a little bit differently, and so you always get this very deep and slightly heathered effect on the yarn, and I really like that. My favorite needles are metal needles for sure. I have the interchangeable set from Chiagu, which I pretty much use maybe 80% of the time, I would say. I'm not using it when I'm knitting socks. For that, I like the Knit Pro metal double pointed needles. I think they are called Zings, if I'm not mistaken. So those are great as well. And for notions, I'm not very fancy at all here. I really like those very simple stitch markers that look a bit like light bulbs. And I also have a very cute tape measure. I like that as well, but yeah, besides that, I don't really have any, how do you call them, needle stoppers or those progress keepers or things like that. Do you have yarn suggestions for sensitive people? In general, I think how soft we perceive a yarn to be is highly subjective. So one person can think of a yarn as very soft and another person can think of it as scratchy. So this can be a bit tricky then to give suggestions. But in general, I think it's worth to know that the softness of a yarn is measured by its micron count. And if you have a micron count that is very low, that means that the yarn is soft, and if it is higher, then it is not so soft or even rustic. So I think if you have a micron count below 17.5, that means that you have a super soft yarn like cashmere, and if it's between 20, you have a soft yarn like merino, for example. If you are looking for, any concrete recommendations, like I said, the Snefnuk by Camarose is a very, very soft yarn. I absolutely love it. I also really like Roma by Lamana. That's a German yarn brand. I'm going to link it for you down below. I started knitting a scarf with it, and it's also super soft. Can I knit e.g. socks using 2 4-ply wools together instead of DK wool and using same size needles without the size of the garment changing? Generally speaking, yes, you can hold 2 strands of a fingering weight yarn together to create a DK weight gauge, but I would always advise you to make a gauge swatch and see if you have to adapt the needle size maybe to get to the gauge that you are looking for. I am knitting with a 85% cotton and 15% baby alpaca yarn. The store caked the skeins for me. One cake worked perfectly. The second cake got a huge ball of tangles about halfway through. Did I do something incorrectly? I knitted from the outside yarn to start. It took me several hours of work to untangle the mess. I know that this can be so frustrating, and I think pretty much everyone can agree that we've all been there and know how annoying it is to, having to deal with that tangled mess when you just want to keep knitting. But I do have a tip for you, and I think it should be a lot easier for you to pull from the inside rather than from the outside, because if you think about it, if you pull from the outside, the cake is rotating all the time, and then maybe it also falls to the ground, you have to pick it back up, and then tangles can happen easily. And if you pull from the inside, you have the cake sitting still and you are just pulling, and that way there's not so much movement and friction within the cake, and this should usually prevent the yarn from getting tangled inside the cake while you try to knit with it. What do you do with your yarn scraps? If you have less than a skein left over. I have made a video about what to do with leftover yarns and scrap yarns, and I'm going to link that for you both on the screen and in the description box. And what I personally like to do is I have 2 scrap yarn blanket projects. Those are long-term projects that I like to add my scraps to. Those are both crochet projects. In addition, I also like, if it's a sock yarn, I like to use the scraps for contrasting heels, cuffs and toes. You could also think about maybe doing like a striped garment and adding the leftovers there. There is also the Sea Glass series by Wool and Pine that I've talked about in a lot of my videos, that was specifically designed for using up leftovers. So if you have a number of leftovers in a similar yarn weight, you can make a beautiful tee out of it. And I think the series also has like a hat, cowl, mitten and several other scrappy ideas for using up those leftovers. I've also made a list, let me check to give you some more tips. You could also do a contrast cast on or bind off, just for a little pop of color. You could duplicate stitch and add some embroidery to your knitted items. You could use it for mending. You could make, just a smaller project like fingerless mittens or just wrist warmers or something like that. You could do a small pouch or a project bag. You could use it, that's a great idea as well. You could use it for stuffing. If you do a stuffed animal or something like that, and you have a lot of short leftovers, like very small pieces, you could stuff it inside. And you could also use it for tassels and pom-poms. So I hope this gave you some ideas what you could do with your leftovers. I would love to know how to knit with Nutiden without holding a lace weight with it. Or is it not worth the hassle? I love this yarn, but I can't seem to tension it without something else with it. I can very much relate to that, because I do have to admit that I have the same issue. So I have mentioned Nutiden before. It is a rather fragile yarn. Let's see if I can show you. It is just really so delicate, because this is the strand and you can really just pull it apart. It just comes apart like nothing. So if you have not knitted with it yourself, you can very well imagine, I think, how easy it is to break this yarn while you're trying to knit with it. So I have to admit, I do not knit with Nutiden single stranded. I either hold a silk mohair yarn with it, or I hold it double. That works really well, because if you hold a stronger yarn with it, it does not break nearly as easily, and if you hold it double, it's pretty much the same. If you would like to, try knitting or practice knitting unspun yarn single stranded, You could use the Plötulopi by Istex, that is an Icelandic yarn. It's also unspun, it also comes in those plates, and I do find that to be a bit sturdier. And there's also Manchelopis by the Spanish company Wool Dreamers, but speaking of it, I think that already comes, you know, caked up with 2 strands, so just forget that. I know that there are several people who are successfully knitting with Nutiden single-stranded. I think it's probably just a question of practice. And what I really like to do in general when knitting with it is that I, you know, like to pull up a strand. That's a bit difficult now. Let's see. Like a larger piece of yarn, maybe double the size of that one here. And then I start knitting with it so that I am not, you know, pulling on the cake, because then it breaks so easily. So I hope that helps, but yeah, I'm not an expert myself here because I also don't really seem to be able to make that work. How do you find good linen fabrics? I absolutely love linen fabrics whenever I sew, which is not that often at the moment, but whenever I do, I really like to use linen because it's just so comfortable to wear. It's so breathable, and yeah, I think it's just lovely. And what I usually like to do is that I look on Etsy. You can, you know, in the search bar, search for just specifically within your country, or maybe for me it's then within Europe. So I know that a lot of linen companies are located in the Baltics, so Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia, and I like to look there specifically because I know that they are such experts in linen fabrics, and they also create a very good quality linen. So this is what I usually do. If you're looking for specific recommendations, I really like Old Linen Mill. I have a dress from them, a shorts. My bedding is Old Linen Mill as well. I'm going to link them for you in the description box. I can highly recommend them. The quality is very high. And Not Perfect Linen is another very popular brand. You might know of them already, but I'm also going to link them down below for you. And let's see, I'm at the moment blanking on the company that sent me this beautiful fabric. They have those very colorful, a bit unusually for linen, you know, printed linen fabrics. So I'm going to link them for you as well. But in general, I would say Etsy is a great place to look. Would it be advisable to dye a finished garment with natural colors, or are there any pitfalls you would circumvent when dyeing the yarn before knitting it up? You can certainly dye a knitted piece with natural dyes, but personally I always recommend to rather dye the yarn, and there are a couple of reasons for that. So when it comes to natural dyes, it is quite hard to get a 100% even color distribution all throughout the yarn or the knitted fabric. So you could very well have some, you know, just slight color variation or even blotches of color. And if this happens on your finished piece that you already put so much time into knitting up, this can be a bit frustrating because it cannot be undone once it's dyed. You could try to over dye it, but depending on the color you first used to dye it, this might not be possible. So this would then be like a total waste of time, energy and money, and very frustrating. And when you are dyeing the yarn, you of course would also have these slight inconsistencies of color, but then when you start knitting with it, I would always advise that you alternate skeins, and then you can mitigate this effect a bit, and you will have, you know, more of a more even color distribution throughout the knitted piece, and not those, you know, concentrated spots that are a bit darker in color. I have made a video about typical mistakes that you should avoid when knitting with hand-dyed yarn. I'm going to link that for you. And I also have written an ebook about different techniques, how to dye yarn certain effects. And one of the techniques is how to create a very even color distribution in a solid skein of yarn. I'm going to link that for you down below in case you're interested, because of course it not only applies to naturally dyeing yarn, it also applies to dyeing fabric as well. Have you ever dyed a set of clothes using acorn tannins? I'm planning on boiling a few kilograms of the nuts for food, and it feels like a shame to pour the dark leftover water down the sink. I assume it's similar to walnut dyeing where you won't need a mordant, but I'm curious if you've had any personal experience with it. I've also noticed the shelled nuts turn red if left in the light for a couple of weeks, apparently because of the tannins, and I wonder if that color might transfer over to natural fibers. I absolutely love the question and the intentionality behind it, and you are very right with your assumption that acorns are rich in tannins and they could very well be used for natural dyeing. I have not tried it myself, but I've read about it numerous times, so you should be able to use them without any additional mordant because the tannins that are so rich in the acorns act as natural mordants. And what you've noticed, the redness of the caps, that comes from the oxidation of the tannins. Usually you could expect acorns to dye like a more of a beige or tan color. And if I'm not mistaken, I think if you are later on modifying the color with ferrous sulfate, you should be able to create some deeper colors, almost, to a darker gray color. So definitely give it a try, and if you do, please let me know how it goes. I have a cotton sweater I made that was damaged with bleach. It's blotchy in areas. I would love to do something to fix it using natural dyes. It was a variegated yarn in soft blues, greens and purples. Is that possible? I'm willing to overdye if necessary, but would need guidance on the color. That is such a great question, and again, I love the intentionality behind it, that you are not willing to just throw the sweater out, but would much rather try to fix it. In general, natural dyes on cotton are a bit trickier because it just takes up the dye very different than a wool yarn, for example. It can be done, but I would not advise you to try to, replicate the colors of the variegated fabric and expect that you would be able to match those and then the blotches would not be visible at all. I would much rather lean into, over dyeing it with a very dark color like a logwood, for example, a concentrated logwood dye that would get you a very dark purple. You could also try to use oak galls and dye it first. You would get a tan color, and then if you modify it with ferrous sulfate, it would get you to a dark charcoal gray. So those are the options that come to my mind immediately. Yeah, I think those would be your best bets, but you should not expect to, get a completely even color result with the bleached spots. You should look at it more as an experiment and see if it works and if you like the result, but it might also not work because, I'm not really sure how the dyed or the bleached spots will take the natural dye. Another thing that came to my mind was if you could try to do something else with it, maybe add a pocket, depending on where the bleached spot is, or maybe add some embroidery over it. I've seen so many beautiful pieces where embroidery was added and, just enhanced the overall look of the piece without, looking weird or anything. So definitely something you could consider as well. Could you share a couple of your current favorite crafty YouTube channels, please? Yes, of course. One thing you will notice immediately that I personally tend to be drawn to two-person knitting podcasts because I really like the interaction. It almost feels like, you're part of a knitting group where people are chatting and you are just immersed in it. So one of my favorite podcasts is the Knitting a Good Yarn podcast with Carmen and Jackie. I really, really like the special connection that those two have, and they just, they are very different kind of podcasts. They are very long. It's usually for about 3 hours, and they also do not edit. So they just press record and go. Though pretty much the contrary of what I do with my videos, but I just really like it. And they are so smart with everything they say about knitting and yarn and life in general. They go on a lot of tangents, but I absolutely love that. I also really like Two Pearls in a Pot with Paige and Sarah. They are located in Australia, so that's a fun thing, I think, because they are knitting, for the opposite season of what we are knitting here in the Northern Hemisphere. And I think they have a very special friendship and connection as well, and I really like watching them too. I also really like those twins who knit, so Rachel and Jessica, sorry. And they are located in the US. And they do knit quite a lot. I'm always amazed at how much they get done between episodes. They have very nice taste, I think, in pattern selection, and yeah, just really like watching them. Who else? I also, of course, like the Fruity Knitting podcast with Andrea and Madeline. I have been watching them for years. They are so educational, and yeah, just really like them and can highly recommend them. They have a lot of great interviews, and it's just a very well produced show. I also like Helle from Danish Musings. She has a very beautiful aesthetic, I think. She knits beautiful things and definitely worth watching as well. Then I like Nitty Netty, so Natalie, also located in the US. She creates, I think, at least one video a week, and yeah, just really like seeing her progress and all the goals that she sets for herself and how she keeps track of everything. She's so well organized. Let's see, did I forget anyone? Yes, of course. I also really like Kuto with Kika, so Veronica Lindberg. She is, you know, just such a special personality. I think she's so bubbly and expressive and creative, and yeah, I really like her videos. And I also wanted to recommend a sewing channel in case you're interested in sewing. Sarah Naomi has a wonderful channel about all things sewing. She also knits, but her main focus is sewing. So definitely worth checking out as well. And in case you're also into, you know, more general DIY, because I really like to watch those videos as well. I actually did DIY a couple of things around our house, especially when we were first renovating it. So that's when I got into those channels, and I still like to watch them because they usually the videos tend to be a bit longer. So I think it's great company when you're, you know, looking for a bit of a longer stretch of knitting. So for that, I really like the DIY wife. I also like DIY Tiff, that is a friend of mine, and she has an absolutely wonderful channel. They are both completely remodeling their houses at the moment. And I also really like XO McKenna. She actually has 2 houses. She purchased one in Texas, which is her, I think it's her home state, when at a similar time when we bought our house here. So that's when I came across her. But she also has a house in California, which she is remodeling at the moment. And yeah, like I said, I just really like to watch those, you know, more home renovation channels when I'm looking for a bit of a longer video. So thank you so much for everyone who sent their questions. I really like answering them. And if you're not aware, this is actually part 3 of this Q&A series. In the first video, I talked a lot about, you know, more of my background, how I got here. I talked about YouTube and some knitting as well. And in the second part was pretty much all about knitting, about yarn, about how to care for garments. And I'm going to link both of those videos for you as well. And if you have any more questions, please just leave them as a comment and I'll try to answer them in a future video. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a wonderful day and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.